Hey everyone, thanks so much to every student who's taken the time to be here. I know finals and APUs are really crushing all of us right now, so we really appreciate it. I'm Neil Goldberg, a junior guitar major at Denver School of the Arts, and I'll be your host. Tonight we'll be conducting 3 student-led interviews with the superintendent finalists. Each question is student constructed, student asked, and intended to represent student voice and opinion in the superintendent search. This is all about where the finalists land on student priorities. We'll start with some introductions of our student moderators and superintendent finalists, and then we'll get right into the interviews. We're going to start with a general kind of get to know you session with all the finalists, and then break into individual, more focused interviews with each finalist to get right into the questions students want and need answers to. By the end of this event, you'll get to choose who you would select for your superintendent. So to start out, let's have each moderator introduce themselves with their names, pronouns, school, grade, and organizations they might be involved with. Let's start with Tanvi.
Hi, I'm Tanvi Glick. I use she or he pronouns. I'm with Student Voice, Student Vote, and for about one more week, I'm a senior at Denver Center for International Studies.
Hi, I'm Talia Cardin. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns, and I'm a junior at South, and I'm part of the Student Board of Education and the Student Bill of Rights group.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kayla. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a junior at Denver South High School, and I'm a co-chair of Student Voice, Student Vote, as well as a representative for ESPO as well.
Great. Thanks so much for all of you taking the time to make sure these questions get answers. Next, we'll hear each superintendent finalist introduce themselves with their names, pronouns, and a 1-minute intro to let us all know a little bit about yourselves. I would say to introduce your school and grade, but I think you all might be a little bit past graduation. So to get started, let's hear from Dr. Stephanie Sullivan.
Neil, repeat that. I don't believe that the candidates heard that part.
Great. All right, so now we'll hear each superintendent finalist introduce themselves with their names, pronouns, and a 1-minute intro to let us all know a little bit about yourselves. I would say to introduce your school and grade, but I think you all might be a little bit past graduation. So let's get started with Dr. Stephanie Sullivan.
Well, hi there. I just tuned in, so I think I may have missed the original directions. I was in waiting room purgatory, but I'm just going to wing it. So as you mentioned, my name is Stephanie Sullivan. I am currently the assistant superintendent in Brevard Public Schools. I go by she and her, so thank you for asking. One thing to tell you about myself in 1 minute. Well, I'm a really proud first-generation American. I come from a really interesting background of a Nicaraguan father, but a mother from England. And my parents met not speaking the opposite language. But love is love, and it all worked out. And I had the benefit of watching my incredible mother learn how to speak Spanish and live in a vibrant Hispanic community in Miami, Florida. And that experience has definitely shaped who I am today. So I'm very pleased to meet all of you and very excited to see how this evening's going to unfold as we go through this process. So thank you.
And next, let's go to Dr. Alex Marrero.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you, Neil, and good evening, all. I am Alex Marrero. I currently have the pleasure of serving as the interim superintendent of schools at the City School District of New Rochelle in New York, of course. Thank you again. Just like Dr. Sullivan said, he and him are the pronouns. I am also a proud parent of immigrant, refugee parent and an immigrant from the Caribbean, and they met in the good old streets of Washington Heights, New York. And I grew up as an English language learner. I'm product of someone who is struggling, not only getting acclimated with the United States and everything that is the hustle and bustle of New York City, but also the language and to become proficient in academia. I have enjoyed today. I'm very much looking forward to this part of the evening because the student group is what fuels me in my decision-making as superintendent. Thank you.
Great. And let's end it off with Mr. Andre Wright.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Neil. I'm Andre Wright. I am currently the Chief Academic Officer in Aurora Public Schools, which is right across the street from DPS. It's he and him. I've been involved in education for 20 plus years, and my parents are both former educators. I have teachers all throughout my family. Education has been a part of my existence since day one. And so my mother was in every school that I went in, and the same for my sister. So we understand the importance of education and teaching and the profession. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation today, and let's have at it.
Great. Thanks to all of you. I cannot wait to hear more of you from this town hall. To get the voices of all the students watching into this process, we've created a survey where you can get your opinion on each candidate's position live during the event. If you have any kind of particular opinion on what any candidate said, you can put that into this survey. Make sure you open that survey now and get ready to tell us exactly what you think. The survey is at bit.ly/supersearchsurvey, all lowercase. We'll also put it on the link to the survey in the comments on Vimeo and Facebook, and it's presented right now on that slide. So if everyone's settled in, let's kick it over to our moderators to start our group conversation with all the finalists. Just for the finalists, each answer for the group session is given 2 minutes as a response. Do you want to start that off, Tom?
Yeah, thanks. Our first question comes from two students, Sabrina, a 10th grader at Northfield, and Cameron, a 6th grader at Skinner. They ask, why do you want to be our next superintendent? And what are the top 3 things you'd want to accomplish in DPS as super?
Shall we just jump in, or are we going to call on? Jump in?
You can go for it.
Okay. I just wanted a disclaimer, but if I already have the floor, I'm going to take the floor. So forgive me. I'll concede the next time around. Why? The why is the most important question. I think I don't want to speak for the other candidates, but I know impact is what fuels a lot of our energy and drive. Being able to impact the lives of one student, which we all have been able to do, that magnified by a classroom to a grade level, to a school building, to an entire district, like I'm currently doing, and the potential to do close to 100, plus the families that it impacts, it's what drives me, because I can only imagine the opportunities that could have been afforded to me if I was able to be blessed with such, I guess, leadership, but also support. I had to do it the hard way. So the top 3 things is making sure that we really put equity in action. That's one, right? There's a lot of talk about equity, but what does it look like in action? Second thing is really to establish the core beliefs, which based on this morning, I understand that there are a lot of needs and wants, and there is an existing Denver 2020 plan, but the core beliefs, are they anchored into the work? So that's number 2. And 3 is making sure that we rid all obstacles for students. So I'm a firm believer in opportunity, and it's been my passion and my motivating force to unapologetically remove barriers in the face of students.
I don't mind jumping in after Dr. Marrero. I'm gonna combine my answers a little bit because why Denver and the priorities I think are really related. One of the things that's been super exciting from the outside is the explicit focus around student needs, student perspective, student voice. That really spoke to me. Some of the challenges that the Denver community has faced in everything from gentrification, declining enrollment, and some of the other conflicts that have been around in the city for a long time. You have a board that's been very vocal and very clear about its desire to rectify some of those challenges. And so why Denver and why my priorities? One, Denver needs to come together. You have these incredible flood of ideas and thoughts and perspectives and resolutions. You've got a group of students that are involved like I've never seen before. So I applaud you all. And so you have all these really incredible elements, but yet it's not coming together. And so for me, in looking at being the superintendent of Denver Public Schools, I think I can help bring the community together to get to a place of action, to bring the ideas together in a comprehensive manner that moves the district forward and beyond a lot of really good ideas. So, that is my key focus right now. 2, academic outcomes. I'm an academic person. I can't avoid it. A graduation rate at 75% hurts me. It hurts me deeply. It's 1 in 4 children are going into the school system in high school and not graduating. When I see like the abundance of culture, ideas, and thought in a city like Denver, and see that you're not getting students so involved in the system that you have to kick them out the door after senior year, that really bothers me. So building that academic skill set, bringing the community together to rally around a specific mission is why Denver and the things that I would focus on.
Good afternoon. I think a lot of the things that my colleagues have presented, I could piggyback on and say, yeah, I agree completely. But why Denver? Why now for me? Specifically, I've been right across the street from you guys for the past 7 years. So I've watched some of the struggles, some of the triumphs that you've had. I've also seen how the narrative that is coming out of Denver is probably contrary to what I thought it was when I originally arrived 7 years ago. And for me, there are 3 things, right? Specifically, I need to make sure that every student in Denver Public Schools is prepared to compete locally, prepared to compete nationally, and prepared to compete globally. Because once you leave us, right, then you have to be prepared for what the next steps are. And that's not just for against your colleagues that might be at the high school across the street. It's about the schools and the products that they're producing within the state itself. And then also what's happening nationally. And then from there, how do you compete globally? And so I think our message, our focus, our energy has to come into play to lift your abilities to be able to do that and expose you to those opportunities along the way. That's going to make sure that you have the type of opportunities that some of us didn't get until it was later in life. If you got the opportunity when I got it, it's second career. I want you to have that opportunity on as soon as you get ready to move into the next phase of your life after high school, and be exposed to those things along the way so you can make an informed decision. For me, that's the purpose of being a superintendent in Denver Public Schools. It's creating this avenue and pathway for you to start leaning into your choices to shape your future so that you're ready on all of those levels to compete and find your way as you move through the rest of your life.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Our next question is, if you could go back and change one aspect of your own education, what would it be? And how has that impacted your aspirations and goals as the new DPS superintendent? Mr. Wright, do you want to start us off for this one?
Sure. I mean, that's a great question, right? I won't say athletically because I would want to be a professional basketball player, but I'm too short. But I'll say if I had something that I could change, I would pay more attention to the opportunities that were provided for me and not dismiss those as something extra, right? Because what I know today, had I known back then when I was in high school, I would have made different choices. And those choices were actually available. I just didn't understand at that particular point in time how to maximize those, right? I have a senior that's in high school right now. And so he's been able to take advantage of those opportunities that I missed. And it's been a better benefit for him and the things that he wants to do as he gets ready to go into college. And so for me, more importantly, I missed that. And as a superintendent, I want to make sure that every student has an opportunity to excel and get involved in the things that they want to get involved in, as well as lean them into areas that they may be uncomfortable with so that they don't miss out. Because once you miss it, it's very difficult to go back and get it. And so I just don't want our students to miss those opportunities to watch themselves grow and flourish.
Well said, Mr. Wright. If I can, Dr. Sullivan, I'll go next because that was an incredible question. And that in itself is my answer. The fact that you're asking us, potentially the next leader of your district, and feel empowered to do so. So if I can go back in time when I had hair on my head and the bangs used to cover my eyes because I was so introverted and afraid to be called on because I felt like I didn't belong, I would definitely exercise the right that you all to speak up, exercise courageous leadership as a student, exercise student voice. Because what has happened is that I've been overachieving since, proving folks wrong. When I was Alexito from the other side of Fordham Road in the Bronx, just because of where I lived and my zip code, educators counted me out. And I just figured that's what they did to Miguel before me, that's what they did to Manuel before me, this is what they're gonna do to Alexi. So I just went with the notion because I had no one around in my community who was empowered. I was definitely not empowered. I was absolutely terrified of educators because that was the culture. That has been a driving force to make sure that I allow what's happening right now, this sophisticated panel that you guys are moderating. So if I could go back, it really personifying courageous leadership as a young scholar.
So this was a great question for me because I've thought about it a lot, and I was so excited when you asked the question. I was ready to jump out of my skin. I've attended a lot of trainings lately around anti-racism and around the systemic nature of racism in our country. And really historical milestones throughout the years that have got us where we are today. And that really laws and policies preceded hearts and minds in the challenges that we're facing. So in going back, I have such pains and regrets on my own teaching and in my own education. I was a history teacher. I was a social studies teacher with just a robust passion for history, social sciences in general, and engagement. And the more I've learned, I first want to go back to students and apologize for giving them an incomplete education. And then I want to go further back and express my anger to those that gave me an incomplete education. And that cycle is going to stop here with me. The incomplete education that I received colored my perspectives to where even as I became a teacher, I didn't understand how woefully insufficient my knowledge was in critical issues surrounding communities and race and the development of our country, and how that has led to the challenges we have today. So for me, looking back is about being a more voracious and demanding learner and a stronger teacher with a much more culturally relevant perspective and a deeper understanding of the history of our country. So that's weighing heavily on me, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot, and I can tell you again, it stops with me.
Thank you everyone for those responses. So our next question is there a student in your past or present that motivated you to be a better leader in education? And Dr. Sullivan, would you like to start us off this time?
Thank you so much. I would. And, some members of the community have heard me speak to this already. One of my favorite students, his name is Antonio. And Antonio came to my school when I was a principal. And as a principal, I did daily routes through the front office to personally greet every student that might be registering. We had a very transient population, and it was typical to be 2 or 3 kids waiting to register. Talking to him, found out that he was from a really difficult neighborhood in Miami, where I grew up, and had been a product of really dramatic crime. His parents were shot down in front of him, and the entire case was chronicled in 48 hours. After that, I went and learned and read and watched the news coverage on it. And what struck me the most was, despite this being a really dangerous community, a community that would have been perceived with lots of negative adjectives, the people in the community loved their community. They cherished their community. And going through this experience with this student, learning about what he went through was a really pivotal point in my career of honoring everything that a child brings to the table as value added. That it's not our goal for kids to want to leave their neighborhood and go off and do things and put the past behind them, which I think was a lot of our education for many years, but rather how to see the value in their sense of community and their circumstance, and help kids reflect on that, help adults reflect on that, in really engaging our students in being transformative for their communities. So Antonio is near and dear to my heart, and I think about him often, and he's always on my shoulder on remembering the value in every single type of family and every single type of community.
The student that I would like to call out, and he is a grown man at this particular point, and actually an assistant principal in the state of Ohio. But Calvin was someone that I taught and coached when he was in high school, and education was not something that was first of mine because of the landmines of life that he had to navigate just to get to school. And once he got to school, it was our opportunity to make sure that we shaped his thoughts and shaped his understanding of what the possibilities could be for him. And Calvin also had to navigate those same life landmines on the way back home. And his community and his neighborhood didn't believe that they had to let up on trying to get him into things that seemed to be the norm at the time. And so my job was to make sure that education became exciting for Calvin, that education became a gateway for him to do something different, and not just be different, but leave a different example. Like, you can actually use education in a way that's going to benefit not only yourself, but your family as well. And so Calvin went on to go to Ohio University. Calvin became the all-time leading rusher in Ohio University and graduated in education. And he's currently an assistant principal. And so I'm really proud of him because I know where he is today. Years ago, we may not have thought that he'd had an opportunity to get there, but through persistence and through him pushing me to get better so he could grow and learn to love education, he's doing quite well at this particular point. So I think about Calvin a lot, and he knows that I'm pulling for him every step of the way.
Incredible stories and impact for both. Mr. Wright, I'm sure that he is returning that favor 10 times over. I would like to share a story of a young man, Guillermo, and how he impacted me, and I had to really reshuffle and reimagine my leadership. As a young man, he and many others were just cutting school. In the middle of the day, in one of our high schools, there were just floodgates, no purpose, and no one cares. So I had to address the leaders and the educators who were just allowing the students to leave. And here I come, someone from City Hall Central, chasing students down, right? Saying, what are you guys doing? Pretty much being the dean, absent of deans. There was this one young man, Guillermo, who just sized me up. Like, I'm not running away from you, sir. So as I approach in the middle of a New York Route 45 highway, zoom traffic, I have this confrontation that turns into a life-altering, transformational leadership experience. So he didn't speak English, so he didn't understand me. So in Spanish, we communicated, and he said that he needed to go to work because it was sunny outside. So I'm still thinking that he's pulling my leg. He's trying to play funny. And once I was able to probe, he said, "Senor, no, listen. It was raining yesterday, so I didn't get a call from Wendy's. Wendy's, a fast food restaurant." I still didn't understand what he was saying. He had to explain to me that he works outside in the drive-thru sweeping, and when it rains, he doesn't have work. So when it's sunny, he gets called in to sweep, and that's the money that he needs, not only to pay the room that he's living in, but also the person who brought him over the border. So in the middle of the street, my head exploded because I realized that all the work that I've been able to do with students from Puerto Rico, from Dominican Republic, in the Bronx, was not going to work to help Guillermo and many others. So what I did was, saw his ID from Guatemala, saw that he was 19 years old. I wished him a great day at work and hoped that the rest of the week was sunny, while I went back to shop to come up with a plan to address the needs of a student who's 19 years old and 2 credits and who will not be graduating on time. So that shifted me as a leader to realize that I do not have all the answers, and we have to have intimate experiences with our students.
Great. Thank you all so much for your responses. I really feel like we can get a good general sense of who each finalist is from those questions. Now we'll be moving into the more individual, in-depth interviews. We'll have 3 interviews, one with each candidate, with nothing but our moderators, the finalist in question, and the questions that we all want answers to. So to start diving in, we'll have our first individual interview with Dr. Stephanie Sullivan. Kayla will be starting us off with this one. Finalists will have 5 minutes to answer each question.
Thank you. Yeah, so the first question is, we've had conversations with hundreds of students across the city in our SB2 listing campaign. And 2 recurring themes we've heard have been 1, dissatisfaction around the curriculum, as well as stress and workload. Dr. Sullivan, how will you ensure that schools' curriculums are more inclusive and encompassing of students' wants in order to combat student stress and unrealistic school workloads? And just as a follow-up question, how does your plan to do this include partnership with youth?
Thank you. So curriculum is a passion of mine. I have studied curriculum my entire career, and I absolutely believe that it is our first and primary responsibility to our students. That it is our job to be incredibly thoughtful when we select curriculum, that we vet it through a very rigorous process for relevancy, for representation, for diversity of thought, for curriculum that is inspiring, curriculum that will encourage students to engage. There's a great book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and it is about curriculum design to increase dialogue, increase communication, and increase students' participation in their own. So we need a curriculum audit. One of the things that I think is important is to have a really good audit at what's in our schools, how the curriculum got in our schools, who's using the curriculum, and who made those decisions. When were those decisions made? Because in my experience, when we select curriculum, we go through a very robust process that involves many stakeholder perspectives on the committees. Students can come in, review the curriculum, and rate the curriculum. I'm used to going through a year-long process of examining bias in text, examining the activities that are there. Is it busy work? Is it extra work? Or is it like inspirational work? Does it make you want to go out and be part of the field? So something that I just think is really important is examining that, doing an audit. Where did this come from? Who picked it? Why did they pick it? And is it time to revisit the curriculum that we have? Like I said, as a teacher, I did a poor job. I used the curriculum that was provided to me. I taught in a way that I was taught, and all that did was perpetuate the problem. And so I think it's really important to dive into it and really understand what students want to see in their materials. I know you guys are really passionate about several topics. We run mandatory financial courses in our district. I'm used to providing that for students, and we have pretty robust health education. I know those are other issues. So I definitely want to work with students. I want to work with community leaders. I want to work with parents and teachers and bring some synergy around that decision making.
Awesome, thank you. Our second question is, students have been repeatedly left out of decision-making processes and spaces, even though the decisions have a direct impact on them and their education. When student voice is included, it is performative, and though the student voices may be heard, they are not listened to. How would you collaborate, listen to, and work with the students to implement the visions of the Student Bill of Rights? The main categories of the bill being school culture, cultural acceptance, equity for all students, accountability of teachers and staff, centering student voice, due process, replacing the Eurocentric curriculum and practice, and implementing a K-12 comprehensive health curriculum.
Yeah, it's interesting that I have sensed student frustration with their involvement in actual decision making as opposed to, potentially token representation of stakeholder group. Because it does seem like Denver Public Schools has really robust programs for student involvement. So when I went through the Bill of Rights with a fine-tooth comb, I had my erasable pen and got ready to sort of mark it off and cross things out, I found myself affirming. The voice of the students and the perspectives and the hopes and dreams, and I'm going to use a better word, the demands that you have for your education. And so I would very much look forward to working with the team to let's get this done. Let's not keep talking about it. Let's not sidestep issues. things like due process. That should not be on the bottom of a list. That should be first and foremost a quick action. For me as a leader, it prompted me to say, hey, am I really doing that for my students? And you know what? I'm not. I'm referring them to a handbook. I'm referring them to a manual. Am I being overt enough in empowering students to be active participants in their education? You know what? I'm not. So you all have already had that influence on me as a leader, and the district I'm currently in is going to benefit from that. So, this is not just, we include students. My perspective is students are our business. You are the ultimate stakeholder. You represent your classmates, and your demands are the single most important ones. I've been known to go into a lot of student assemblies and tell kids to be angry, to speak up, and demand what they're entitled to. And I look forward to that energy. I'm excited by the passion of the students, and I will absolutely work diligently side by side with our students in getting that done.
Do you mind if I ask a follow-up? How do you have any ideas on how you would specifically give students decision-making power and power over these demands to make change in the district?
Well, definitely in the writing of policy. So, most school districts are run in two buckets, one policy and two procedures. And so I think both are important. So working on policy, we would work together to draft language for the school board to vote on. School board owns policy. And when they set policy, then it automatically governs the district. And then it's my job to implement it. The second step is, of course, procedures. What procedures are in place, codified in writing, that outline these expectations? We would work together on drafting it. I'll give you an example. We worked with student groups on mental health practices. I worked with student groups on vaping, different things that they saw. We took students to Tallahassee, which is like 5 hours away, the capital of Florida. It's not like right across the street for you guys. We loaded students up on buses, took them to the Capitol, and had them lobby with the actual lawmakers themselves and vocalizing their demands. So I would work alongside coordinating those events, drafting procedures, drafting policy alongside student leaders, and then presenting that for action.
Can I ask, on a similar note, how do you plan to ensure accountability to that idea? How do you plan to ensure that students have ongoing involvement in policy and procedure, that it's not just a yearly thing, particularly even at lower levels of administration? How do you plan to ensure that there's real accountability to student voice in schools and classrooms?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's a great challenge, right? So we get central office ideas. We have central office thoughts. Students can be a part of that. But realistically, we have 200 micromanaged sites. And in my opinion, the only thing that matters is what the child experiences in that classroom. And far too often, we stop at district level mandates, district level procedures, but we're not really working with teachers. So work must be done on not only training teachers, because I really feel like teachers are there emotionally, but empowering teachers to be part of the student voice, reminding teachers that they working alongside their students is really the magic. That's where you all are served, not up in the district. So being extremely vocal, extremely clear about our expectations, having avenues for students to report frustrations, first at their school level. We want to try to partner with students in reporting some of those concerns, but having school advocates, having teachers as part of the process as allies to students. I think that's really important. I saw when you guys did your presentation to the board, you had teachers also saying, yes, I want students to have these rights, these privileges, these curriculums, these demands. That is, I think, a next big step, is how do we rally the teacher force to buy into these same perspectives? And then it's not a top-down management, it's more like the energy surrounding these rights and expectations.
What about in cases where student interests don't necessarily align with teacher interests? I'm specifically thinking of things about student involvement and teacher evaluation. How do we ensure that student needs are met in those cases as well?
Yeah, the bottom line is is the student is the customer being served. And so when it comes to teacher evaluations, when it comes to teachers evaluating principals, when it comes to principals evaluating the district, you look for patterns. You look for overarching patterns that come up again and again and let you know this isn't a grudge or a frustration or an act of immaturity, right? So when we are getting in classrooms a lot, when students have opportunities to provide feedback throughout the year, when we're able to examine student work and have conversations with students, when teachers are being evaluated, and I think teachers would agree with this because I think teachers are the most important piece of the puzzle. But when we're evaluating teachers, I'm going in and I'm talking to the students. I'm looking at their student work. I'm looking at their products. I'm asking them questions, sometimes to the annoyance of teachers, but usually they're on board. And so I don't think a student would want somebody taking a knee-jerk reaction to them. I wouldn't want that for our teachers as well. It's about developing patterns, looking at things that maybe are starting to concern us a little and having those conversations early on. If we don't have those conversations early on and we don't know perhaps there's some warning signs, then we can't help correct it.
So sorry, this is a really important conversation. We have another question to get to.
Thank you.
Tanya, do you want to introduce?
Yeah. I was going to say we do need to kind of move on to another issue, which is that both the Student Bill of Rights, as Talia discussed, and SV2's listening campaign have identified dress code as a big student concern. Dress codes can be reflective of racism and classism in the school system and can perpetuate misogynistic principles and rape culture in our schools. How will you address student expression and dress code's potential harm to students of color and those who present femininely?
Yes, I have to admit, I'm not completely familiar with Denver Public Schools dress code, but I can give you my perspectives in general. I want a kid in school. I want a child there. I don't really care what they're wearing. I don't really care the colors of their hair or the style. I don't care if there's piercings. I don't care if it's flip-flops over sneakers. These things don't concern me. I want a child to get up and be excited to go to school and not be second guessing whether they're going to have a negative experience when they walk into school. Now, there's probably some extreme things related to safety that's not at the top of my mind, but certainly that doesn't involve straps and hems and things that are just commonly accepted things for children to wear. I'm not concerned about it as a leader. I'm more concerned about students knowing that when they walk into school, somebody's going to greet them with a giant smile. Somebody's going to be really happy to see them. Somebody's going to be sad they were absent the day before and ask questions about it. Somebody's going to welcome them warmly into the classroom. That's my priority. And so I would certainly do whatever I can to influence whatever process is in place right now to make sure students are just greeted warmly and people are excited to see them.
Awesome, thank you. And our last question is, this question comes from Finley, a 6th grader at DSA, and an anonymous 11th grader at CEC. So keeping in mind that social inequity and white supremacy that we're seeing in our society, and how important intentional support can be in repairing these harms in our schools and communities, how do we hold teachers/administration accountable for actions and attitudes that uphold these harmful ideas?
Yeah, everybody's on a growth. Everybody's on a learning curve, right? So most of you guys are way ahead of us. I express my vulnerability in some of the failures in my own teaching and my own experience. And so as much as I believe in restorative practice, you hear about it a lot in terms of students and discipline, but restorative practices is really about bringing together two people that feel aggrieved. They feel like they have had a negative experience and it has broken the trust. And so when something like that happens with students and teachers, we've got to bring people together. We have to, one, assume positive intent. And then two, the teacher needs to understand how they have hurt the child, and the child needs to understand the teacher's perspective because we're all growing. So kids are further than us in some spaces, and we've got knowledge and experience in other spaces. The key is bringing people together and having really open, genuine conversations without barriers up, without defensiveness, to say, hey, when you say that way, this is how it makes me feel. I have to believe the vast majority of the teachers do not want to create that feeling. They just may have been educated in a time, in a space, and an area where that was not front of mind. Bringing people together, I think, is the single most important thing.
Thanks so much, Dr. Sullivan. To move from one doctor to another, let's kick it off to an interview with Dr. Alex Marrero. Kayla will start this one off too. Same rules, 5 minutes for answers per question. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So our first question, we've had conversations with hundreds of students across the city in our SB2 listing campaign. And two recurring themes we've heard have been dissatisfaction around the curriculum. Oh, I think we need to pause for a second.
Hello, yes. You were already speaking, Kayla, when I entered. Sorry. Please, if you don't mind.
Yeah, awesome. I can just repeat it.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay, so our first question for you is, we've had conversations with hundreds of students across the city in our SB2 listing campaign. And two recurring themes we've heard have been dissatisfaction around the curriculum, as well as stress and workload. How will you ensure that schools' curriculums are more inclusive and encompassing of students' wants in order to combat student stress and unrealistic school workloads?
Oh, great question. The meat and potatoes of what we do. I'm corny by nature, right? So curriculum, instruction, teaching, and learning are the meat and potatoes of what we do as educators. You mentioned inclusive. So I would say that first, it's critical for our curricula to be inclusive and also be culturally responsive or familiar, right? Sensitive to all. It would be inappropriate from someone from the outside coming in to say that we will have to audit. So I'm going to say respectfully, I'm going to do an exploration, right? Based on the conversations I've had with principals earlier this morning and from teachers, the level of rigor and the expectations are in a good place, right? So I want to just commend what's happening out of central administration. I believe it's Deputy Superintendent Acevedo, who I have yet to meet, and the work and the expectations in terms of LEAP, right? Making sure that student voice is incorporated even in units and lessons. So first, I will do an exploration to see if there is a need for an audit. It seems as if there isn't. So the second part of your question is, I will investigate using the student's voice and using actually the Student Bill of Rights as a point of leverage, meaning an entry point. In there specifically, there's a section called Student Voice, and I would ask the question, where is the student voice in these lessons, in this curriculum? Why are we adopting this course? Is it because of student demand? Show me the inventory that is forcing us to respond to change the course catalog. So really on the macro systems level, I would do a lot of questions in terms of my entry plan and my listening tour before I start becoming that imposer of facts, because I'm in no position to do so. As long as what I've heard this morning is in practice, and it seems like it is, it's just the amount of level that students are undergoing, in particular coming out of COVID, and how we've been able to really address the needs of the student. And this goes well beyond the classroom, Kayla, well beyond the classroom.
Yeah, and I know you kind of responded to this question, but just as a follow-up, how does your plan to do this include partnership with youth?
Oh, intimate. So that's how I function as a superintendent in my school district. I have a student advisory circle. These are students who had to apply. Of course, they had recommendations, whether they were teachers and principals, but I have the fortunate opportunity to meet with my students bi-weekly, every other Friday evening, and it's purposeful because of virtual, so we don't have to go to any school. And these are students who have a continuum, a legacy student who've been K through 12 through our system. So when I'm asking questions, whether it's, hey, should we go asynchronous because of the snow day? Or questions that are really going to have impact well beyond their tenure, because they're college bound, which is the hot topic at the moment. What should we do about school ranking, right? Who are we to say whether we're going to rank or not because of the COVID year that happens when the students who are impacted are those juniors who are rising seniors? So in terms of how voice, they're critical. I get teased. When I have a cabinet meeting and there's a hot topic, folks say, well, we have to wait till Dr. Marrero speaks to the students. And when I hear that, I know that it's working, because that's how it should be.
right, thank you. Our next question is, students have been repeatedly left out of decision-making processes and spaces, even though the decisions have a direct impact on them and their education. When student voice is included, it is purely performative. And though the students' voices may be heard, they are not listened to. How would you collaborate, listen to, and work with students to implement the visions of the Student Bill of Rights? The main categories of the bill being school culture, cultural acceptance, equity for all students, accountability of teachers and staff, centering student voice, due process, and informing students of their rights, replacing the Eurocentric curriculum, and implementing a K-12 comprehensive health curriculum.
First, I want to acknowledge the fact that we have a Student Bill of Rights. I think Denver Public Schools are leaps and bounds ahead of other districts with the Student Bill of Rights, the consent decree, the Black Excellence Plan, whether they're resolutions or actually written doctrine that are court-ordered. It's a leaps and bounds, so I commend the organization. The question I have is that something that's in practice? And I mean that with all due respect, right? Because I don't know. In terms of those parts of the Student Bill of Rights, student voice was 4th or 5th on your list, and when I read the document, why isn't it the first one? Right, so I would say it should be anchored in the philosophy of what's forthcoming, right, in terms of the Bill of Rights. And in particular, when it comes to the accountability section, what really struck a chord with me is that there's a clear topic sentence that says students have the right to teachers who are representatives or reflect the student body. Don't know if that's the case, but my surface level exploration, only the data that I can gather, seems like it is not. And recently, right, in terms of the last decade and a half, in terms of central level administration, it definitely has not. That I know, in terms of the prior 3 superintendents, 2 of which who do not represent the student body. So I would say that I would first honor what we as a district put into writing, right? Because if not, shame on us that we put so much effort into it for it not to be manifested in practice. That's step one. And I would start by addressing those areas that need to be addressed. So how are we going to attract talent if we do not have a representation of you all in the classroom? How are we going to make the work that we're doing so impactful to you, like we heard Mr. Wright say earlier, that you want to do what was done to you, right? How are we going to make you interested in the field of education? I sit on plenty of college level boards, and it's scary, the field of education, where we're headed. The needs are continuing to increase, but yet the profession rate in terms of those who are looking to become professionals are declining. It's scary in terms of who's going to be in front of students. So I will do everything that I mentioned earlier, Talia, in terms of advocating my student circle. I will bring that to DPS, and my hope is that it takes traction just like it did in New Rochelle. When they found out that the superintendent has a student circle, and those students are influencing decision, and rightfully so, my principals started having the same leadership groups. So that's what's supposed to happen in all the districts across the nation. I know that's how I function as a building principal, and that's how I function as a superintendent. So student voice is anchored in my decision-making, and we are always talking about stakeholders. And sometimes students are left out of the equation as if they're not stakeholders. And they're not simply stakeholders. They are the reason why we're in our field, right? So if anything, I'm going to prioritize. Now that comes with a caveat. Comes with a caveat because if we're going to allow student voice, we as a governing board, including myself as superintendent and non-voting member of the governing board, need to relinquish a little bit of power if we're going to empower, right? So it's not about engagement. It's definitely not about involvement. It goes from involvement to engagement to empowerment. Empowerment means that the folks in control need to be comfortable with relinquishing a bit of that
power. So you talked a little bit about, sorry, Talia, if you have another follow-up as well. Just wanted to. You talked a little bit about the student circle and the student advisory boards, both at the district level and in schools. I was wondering how you see yourself in the district empowering students who maybe don't have the existing investment and don't take the action themselves of applying for running for student government advisory boards, that sort of thing. How do we ensure
Great,
voices are heard
great
outside?
question. Love the question, because there's so many who aren't going to do what you all did, who's not going to start off this session like Neil did and just wow us as, oh my God, look at the student empowerment. But that's when I rely on you all. So sorry to put it on you. So I'm putting the burden on you all. Because if you're meeting with me, my question is, okay, how do your constituents feel about such? And when I mean, that means whether you're far northeast representation, whether you're an athlete in terms of your student scholarly athlete affiliation, are you representing the LGBTQ? What are you bringing back? And I saw your profiles and seeing that you're all engaged in many communities. So I'm taking that into part. So just because you have the access doesn't mean that you have the privilege, right? It's the responsibility that comes with that access. So it's the duty of all of you, now you're student leaders, to make sure that you tap the shoulders of those who do not want to be bothered and discover the why, because I want to know why, because I used to be that student, but here I am flaunting my stuff, right? Not afraid of a thing, but trust me when I tell you that I was a student that you had to track down to get me to serve any quality in a guidance question or a survey, just because I want to know part of it. So I'm going to leverage the group. So it's not on me, that's the funnel effect, right? So the pyramid, so everybody touches everyone.
Representation is definitely a huge part of it, but I do want to ask if you think the district or the schools should have any larger role in reaching out and actively engaging those students that aren't already going for leadership positions.
Without a doubt. School economy in terms of autonomy and principal level autonomy, something that resonated this morning in my meeting with the principals and what I practice, right? So although we should have a shared vision, right? Denver 2020 or Denver 2025, hopefully, in terms of our core beliefs and what we're striving towards. Every school has its own culture, has its own learning environment. And it's unfair and unrealistic for anyone to impose expectations on the school level. However, that's where the school building principal can develop that culture that all you can relate to depending on what your experience was. So I would really leverage building level autonomy, right? But my goal is to make sure that there's coherence on how we execute.
Awesome, thank you. I do want to move on to our next issue, which is, I think both the Student Bill of Rights that Talia previously talked about and SB2's listening campaign identified dress code as a big issue that students are concerned about. Dress codes can be reflective of racism and classism in the school system and perpetuate misogynistic principles and rape culture in our schools. How will you address student expression and dress code's potential harm to students of color and those who present femininely?
Oh, love this question because I lived it as a young student. I remember what it was to be ridiculed, come up with a lie, borrow my brother's sneakers just because a pair of Jordans was so out of reach for me and my family. But yet some folks in the same community, right? So we were all poor, but some had that access that I didn't. So I guess there were levels even in the poorest part of the Bronx. So I lived it as a scholar. I lived it as an administrator in which we had a dress code. And I know the pros and cons of both. Right? The pros are very clear that if we all have uniform, then we shouldn't have to deal with as much of the ridicule, right? As much, because it's never going to go away, right? It's because it's all about swag, right? The way my kids used to wear their tie used to be a little bit cooler, and the tie used to be better than the other. So we had tie and khakis, and even then we struggled. However, as a leader, I made the decision that after year 2, it was my responsibility to offer the uniform, right? So if we're going to continue with this dress code, how are we going to modify it? The ties go away, and we're going to do a polo. The students design the logo, and then I'm purchasing 2, and everybody gets 2 to the household. So in terms of DPS, I have been able to peruse the dress code, and I know that it's vague in the sense that there is building level autonomy expected as long as the attire does not disrupt the learning environment which I endorse. So I'm all about expression. I'm all about individuality, but school attire must meet the reasonable standards of cleanliness and show respect to all, your educators and to your colleagues and to your peers, right? Because then it's going to get in the way of what we're in school for. So we can really be individuals, And there's so many ways, right? I'm showing a little bit of that, right? When people told me don't wear that, that's going to be too flashy, right? Because this is who I am, right? A pocket square defines me in a sense. However, it's not disrupting anything, right? So if I'm going to wear a shirt that says something that's inappropriate, then the focus of this video is going to be what's on my chest and not what I'm saying and what I'm going to say I'm going to do. So I will honor the current dress code, which allows for very macro level expectations. Do not disrupt the learning environment, and empower the school level autonomy to enforce their dress code if there is one. But I would also ask for supporting evidence on how the community and you all as students were incorporated in the decision on the what, where, and how it looks if there is a dress code in a particular school.
Just as a follow-up, I would say you mentioned how the dress code is kind of vague, and I think that that vague language allows for people in power to sometimes abuse that power and regulate student bodies. And an example of this is this year, one of our high schools banned do-rags. I was just wondering how you feel about people using these vague guidelines to their advantage.
Wow. So that's interesting, right? Because we struggled with also hat attire. So that was not part of the dress code. That in itself was a different part of our code of conduct, right? For a lot of reasons. You know, we wear hats in New York, do-rags were rampant, and hats that used to cover eyes. And then we had to respond, right? Because we didn't know if a student was well, right? In terms of making sure that they're healthy as they sat. So we, in that particular school, came up with a headgear policy. So that, to me, although it's attire, falls slightly less under a dress code and more of the expectation of a scholarly student. If it is getting in the way of the learning. If it's not, then we shouldn't address it. Now, if we're just going to blanket ban them and there's no justification on why, right? Then I don't understand it at all, right? So I know in New York, part of that was gang affiliation and bandanas and do-rags and certain colors and certain patterns. So to avoid any flagging or any representation in our schools, we went with no headgear, right, during the school day. But you can during breaks, you can during your lunch, and we had open campus and students went out and came back in. But inside the school learning environment, nothing on your head to make sure that you're actively present. So I would support that, but I need justification. A blanket, no more, just because is not going to suffice as a superintendent. I need justification and tell me how it has interrupted the learning environment in your school.
All right, our next question comes from Emily, an 11th grader from South, and Quentin, a 12th grader from South, and a 10th grader from DMLK. In a school district that has largely resisted change in favor of traditional school formats and comfort, how do you plan to deconstruct systems and expectations in DPS that may harm students, like dress code and school start times, and open the district to change, especially after COVID-19 radically impacted, damaged, and altered our district, revealing weakness within DPS?
Wow, it's a deep question. If it's a matter of whether we have to shift because of an observation, then I'm going to say it's really going to involve strategic planning. However, if it's blatant in terms of harming students, and that's what had me a little bit puzzled. You started your question with harming students. So I want to just really answer that piece of the question first, that I have zero tolerance for any practice that's going to harm students. Point blank, period. So zero tolerance if we have a system or a mechanism that the end result is harm to students, we have to eradicate it immediately, first and foremost. So I'm going to stress again, zero tolerance. However, if it's perceived, then we have to explore, right? Some may think you're harming me, but it's not systematic, then that's when the exploration begins. And we all as educators are mandated reporters when it comes to inappropriate behavior or systems that harm. I'm going to say that we're beyond mandated reporters, we're mandated responders. So it doesn't require Dr. Marrero to identify it or to casually come across it when he's visiting your school. I expect all those who sit in front of you or stand in front of you, whether it's virtually or in your classroom, the ones that you pass in the hallways, to say, not here. Because that's what I would do. Earlier, when we were all together with the other candidates, I mentioned how I took it upon myself to ruin my shoes to chase down students because I didn't want them in harm's way when they should have been in math class, in arithmetic, or they should have been in civics, right? I expect that from all our educators. So I think it's a culture shift. So I'm gonna really answer by saying all and students are expected to embrace culture. All are expected to embrace religion, sexual orientation, and race. And if we're not, then quite frankly, shame on us. And we need to address it immediately. However, if there's a perception and it's not as blatant, because I simply do not know, then we have to take a deep dive and make an assessment after an audit using your feedback as qualitative and using some concrete data, whether it's surveys from parents, community members, and teachers. So it's anonymous, so everybody can be free. And then shift, starting with the mindset. Shift the mindset to make sure that everybody believes that students can. So deep question. The response is so many layers depending on what the reality is.
And so because we have more time than we thought we would, we've actually been able to add a new question. So Marrero, thank you so much for everything that you said. Kayla, do you want to ask this new one?
Yes. So our last question comes from Finley, a 6th grader at DSA, and an anonymous 11th grader at CEC. So keeping in mind the social inequity and white supremacy that we're seeing in our society and how important intentional support can be in repairing these harms in our schools and communities, how do we hold teachers and administration accountable for actions and attitudes that uphold these harmful ideas?
Very, very similar to my response that I just mentioned, right? So if it's going to harm students and holding accountable, zero tolerance, and using progressive discipline when necessary. And I don't want to come off as a disciplinarian, right? So I believe in supporting and making sure that everybody is honored their not only due process, but the opportunity to share the why, right? However, you're striking a chord with me, right? So it seems as if you all being victimized, and that goes at the absolute opposite of what we took, the unofficial oath. And I wish we were all asked to take an oath when we accept our hoods, when we become doctors or educators. If we are harming, and the last two questions are leaning towards how we're hurting students, not supporting them at all costs. So my philosophy is getting rid of obstacles. And what I'm hearing a little bit is that there are obstacles that are in place and perhaps systemic that's making it difficult for Kayla and the Kaylas that are coming beyond your tenure here to succeed. So the same response, this is unacceptable, right? So it's going to be zero tolerance, right? Due process if needed, but it first has to start with an exploration on the why. And troubled to hear that clearly it's happening because I've heard it on a couple of occasions during this session already. So how to address, it's going to be very fair, but incredibly firm because it's something that goes against why we are in the business of education, right? Decisions are in the best interest of students, never the opposite. Do I have a time for a question? Or that's not allowed?
I think we have 5 minutes until we need to switch to Mr. Andre Wright. So yeah, that sounds good.
Well, thank you, because this is going to help me really get a better understanding on what's happening from the ground level, boots on the ground, and potentially what's either funneling up or not to district. So can anyone provide an example of a student-led initiative that should have been leveraged by the district that was not?
I can speak a little bit about this actually. So Tanya and I have been part of Student Voice, Student Vote for a while now, and we were trying to pass a bill and legislation to lower the voting age in school board elections to 16, 17-year-olds. And last election season, there was another amendment that passed, Amendment 76, that essentially made our bill unconstitutional. And a lot of news coverage didn't get over it, and it seemed like not a lot of people knew neither about our bill nor Amendment 76. So I feel really passionate about that. But Tanja, if you want to add on to that, feel free to as well.
Yeah, I think that's something that could have stood for more support from the district, particularly at the board level. I don't know if the members from ESPO have any projects that come to mind as well that may have been overlooked by the district or that should have gotten better accountability measures.
I think the biggest example to use right now is our Student Bill of Rights, which we presented to the district and still no action has been taken.
So if I'm not mistaken, I see Project Voice, sorry, Project Voice, I want to call you by your name, said that there was a resolution that in support. So what I have, thank you for that, right? Because that's the type of questions I would ask intimately, but also at a public forum, at a board meeting, in terms of how we can use the vehicles that already exist, right? Black Excellence Plan is a resolution. Consent decree is court ordered. Bill of Rights, if it isn't, right, there's some debate, but I believe it is because it was presented to me as something that was already board approved and a resolution. Why can't we take it to the next level, right? And the next level, is it going to be a court-ordered mandate? Then, hey, let's do it. Let's be the first district to pave the way. So what I'm hearing as a synopsis is that there needs to be a more concerted effort to empower student voice in DPS. And I did a little bit of research on Project Voice. I know that you all are doing incredible work, but there are others. Padres and Jóvenes Unidos needs to be leveraged. Also, the Young Aspiring Americans for Social and Political Activism, if it's not leveraged, should be part of the conversation, needs to be in the room, in the virtual table. And of course, the local communities. And that's how I've been able to, in New Rochelle, La Fuerza Latina are partners. And Servicios de la Raza need to be partners if they aren't already. And not superficial partners, right, that we can just name drop. Folks who are at the table with the same duty that I'm going to task you all. Okay, who are you representing? And is it your perspective or the perspective of different groups? Because everybody has stakeholders and constituents that they should be advocating for. So thank you for allowing me to ask that question. I have your bios, and I'm going to ask another question if I'm permitted. If I'm not mistaken, you're all from district-led schools, right? So the question I have is, considering there's been so much conversation this morning about innovation versus charter versus district-led, what would an 11th grader, a rising senior like you all, in a charter school ask me that you didn't ask already? And quite frankly, what would they ask you if you were the ones with the access to the superintendent?
So actually, if you're okay with it, I think that's a great question, but we have somebody who has a follow-up question to something previously.
Sure. It's your opportunity to ask away, please.
Yeah, I know that you mentioned earlier about like student priorities and things. I was just wondering if in your previous response, we were just wondering kind of, would you be willing to maybe participate in a pledge to uphold student priorities? And how would that look like for you? And how would you feel supporting that?
I'm sorry, can you say that last part again? I had a little break in my connection.
Yeah. I was just wondering how you would feel about supporting a pledge to uphold student priorities, since I know that you mentioned student priorities is a big value for you earlier in your response.
Yeah. So will I support a pledge? I'm going to advocate for it. So it's beyond supporting it, right? So when I'm in either a boardroom or in an executive cabinet meeting, right? The anchor and the golden rule of all decision-making that leaders should be really weighing is, how does it impact the students? And we shouldn't have to wonder if I already have the answer. And if I can pull it out and say, here's the pledge, then it makes everybody's life in terms of decision-making easier. But more importantly, it gets to the result that we need to. So no, I wouldn't support it, because that's an understatement, Kayla. I'm going to encourage it and ask for the deliverable.
Great, thanks so much. So that ends our time with Dr. Marrero. Thank you so much for everything that you've given us. Now we'll be moving on to our session with Mr. Andre Wright to finish us off on our individual interviews. So let's bring in Mr. Andre Wright.
It's been a pleasure.
Before we get into it, we want to remind you all of our survey. So if you go to the link bit.ly/supersearchsurvey, which is coming up on our slide now, you will, or super search poll, you will be able to involve your opinion directly into this conversation and show that your opinion matters in this topic of choosing a new superintendent. Let me see if we have Mr. Wright in now.
Neil, pardon me, I'm still in the room. I think someone needs to shift me out of here. So moderator, please shift me out of the room.
Great, thanks for letting me know.
While we're waiting,
just to
sorry, just want to say, while we're waiting on Mr. Wright to join us, I want to point out that all of our questions are sourced from students across the district, including from students at charter schools, and the dress code issue particularly was one that was repeatedly raised by students at charter schools that typically have stricter dress codes than most traditional schools do.
Thank you for that.
Exactly. As I've said,
Dr. Marrero, you can just leave the Zoom call.
Thank you.
Sure.
This entire town hall is all about talking about the issues that students raise and that affect students directly. This is all about our student priorities. Just to restate what I had said earlier, bit.ly/supersearchsurvey and bit.ly/supersearchpoll will get your opinions directly into this conversation so we can see exactly what students are thinking. I think that there are a bit of technical difficulties in getting Mr. Wright in, so we will have all that figured out very shortly. This is a great time to get your opinion in now. We've heard two of our candidates, or our finalists, so now would be a great time to get in your opinion. How do you feel about what both of them have said? What are any opinions that you've taken from this? Take this time to get all those into the survey and poll. Thank you. Just for an update, we're trying to get him in now, so it won't be too much longer. Sorry for the wait. So it seems like since we have more time, we might be bringing Sullivan back in, if that's possible, to maybe ask one more question while we get Mr. Wright in.
She is no longer on the Zoom call. So Kathleen, can you perhaps reach out to her? Oh, here comes Mr. Wright.
Great. All right, well, now we'll be starting off our individual interviews with Mr. Andre Wright. Kayla, start us.
Hi, Mr. Wright. So our first question is, we've had conversations with hundreds of students across the city in our SB2 listing campaign. And two reoccurring themes that we've heard have been dissatisfaction around the curriculum, as well as stress and workload. So our question is, how will you ensure that schools' curriculums are more inclusive and encompassing of students' wants in order to combat student stress and unrealistic school workloads?
Thank you for that question. So I think the best example that I can use is, I'm a father of a senior, and my daughter graduated some years ago. And let me tell you why your question is so important and relevant to me. My daughter attended a very affluent high school, not a lot of students of color that attended that high school, and she really struggled. The curriculum that was being used, resources being used, were not reflective of her, were not reflective of her culture. And she found very few opportunities to engage in interests that were very important to her. And through that process, I realized that I had to get an opportunity for her to be heard an opportunity for her to find her voice, find her place and space within the structure and systems that were available. And so I literally moved my daughter from the affluent school to my old high school, which was predominantly Black, still is to this day. She found her place, she found her space, she found her connections. She maintained her relationships, of course, where we were living, but the fact that she needed something uniquely different that the school where she was not able to offer her, spoke volumes to me. As a leader, as an executive director at that particular point in time, in a 100,000 student district, I said, there's absolutely no way that I would ever want another parent to have to experience moving their child in order for them to feel connected through the very practices that were going on a daily basis. So for me, it's personal, right? When I think about my son, who has had to indoctrinate himself everywhere he's gone, it hasn't been a place that has said to him, we welcome you, we welcome your culture. It is, you now need to assimilate yourself where you are. And so I see the same thing happening again. So in response to the question itself, we have to do a deep dive into what we are using as resources, make sure that you all have an opportunity to give voice and give your assessment of those resources to see where the connections are or where the disconnects may be. And that's a part of analyzing and interrogating your curriculum. That's what we should be doing anyway. And so that's my response to that. It's a part of my process of how I enter into this system or how I enter into any system. But more importantly, that's what I would do in Denver.
Thank you. And just as like a follow-up, how does your plan to do this include partnership with youth?
Absolutely, right? So this is part of the conversation of the 360 feedback loop. So what typically you'll see in most districts is that they ask for feedback, but you guys get left out. So we talk to teachers, we talk to principals, we even let community members go through and give feedback on resources. But we haven't done a good job of saying this, the additional feedback loop are our kids, our students, our seniors, juniors, freshmen, sophomores, wherever this resource is applicable, you become a part of that, right? And not saying that once we've decided, then here it is. And so you become a part of the feedback loop that informs the resource that we want to allocate.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about dress code as an issue. I think both the Student Bill of Rights and SV2's listening campaign have uncovered that that's something that a lot of students are concerned about, the ways that it can be reflective of racism and classism in the school system, and the ways that our dress codes can perpetuate misogynistic principles. How will you address student expression and dress code's potential harm to students of color and those who present femininely?
That's a good question. So I'm a lot older than you guys, but expression has been around for forever, right? And you know as well as I do, there are going to be other events, unfortunately, that may occur where students want to express themselves. I think expression is fine. I don't have a problem with it, but I will say to you all, and you know this to be true, I'm sure you've had conversations with your peers where you probably said, well, he or she probably needs to put something else on. That might be a little too over the top. So you've had those conversations probably with one another, and that's probably some of the spaces that we can have conversations together as to what is it that we expect, what are the ranges, what are the things that we say, listen, it's okay to be able to express yourself. And for me, as long as it doesn't interfere with our ability to make sure we're preparing you for those three areas that I told you, then I don't have a problem with it, right? I don't. I need you focused on making sure that you're prepared to compete locally, right, nationally and globally. That means a lot to me. And I don't want to spend or have adults spend all of their time being the clothes police. That's just not effective. That causes conflict, and expression is a part of where we are right now, right? There's been a lot of that. There have been so many things that have happened for me to sit here and say, you shouldn't express yourself. You shouldn't express how you feel. I'm not going to stifle that. That's not my responsibility to do that. You should be able to say where you are and where your thinking is at this particular point in time, especially in response to some of the things that we've seen happen over the past couple of years.
How much autonomy do you think schools should have over dress codes or uniforms? And specifically, do you think there are places where that level of autonomy, that level of enforcement of stricter uniforms, particularly in some charter schools, can harm students?
Yeah, so at this particular point, like, my reach is not necessarily into how charters govern themselves, right? Not as I sit here today, okay? So in my opinion, if you're not a part of the decision, then you're a part of the problem, right? And people don't understand how that can be. You have to invite your students into the conversation. You have to invite them into what you're thinking as adults in order for them to be able to say, I really don't get why you're saying that this is more important than what I'm telling you, or I don't understand why I can't express myself this way, and give me valid explanations as to why, right? That's important because that's the two-way conversation. And what you end up doing, Thandi, at that point is you create culture. When you don't do it, guess what? You create culture. It's negative, it's adversarial, and it keeps you from achieving the goals and things that you've set forth. And so for me, it is, how do you bring all parties together to have that conversation and then settle on, here's what we want our school to be. Here's what we want our school to become. And here's what we want our culture to be able to reflect as it relates to the students in the building.
So I have a follow-up question. Where do you think that the line is drawn between expression and giving too much liberty for what students are allowed to wear?
Well, I think, Neil, where do you think it's drawn? Because you're expressing yourself. So I think the most important piece would be, where do you think you would have crossed the line, right? Because if you tell me where you believe you would have crossed the line, then I know at what point you're going to say, nah, that's a bit much. But if you only rely on me, that's just a point of contention, because I don't know what your thinking is. I want to know, where's your line? Not only your line for yourself, but where's your line as it relates to your colleagues, your peers, right? Where would you draw it? Because if I'm the only one providing you with that information, Neil, then it's one-sided. Once again, I go back to, it's a collaborative conversation. And I need to understand where you are, and then you need to understand where I am. I don't want to dictate that, because half of the students on this call would say, well, that's wrong. But if I ask you first, then we can have a dialogue about it. And then you understand where I stand, I understand where you are, and then we can place those frameworks and measures in play. So we can say, yeah, this is probably where we would draw the line as a unit.
So just to completely clarify, that's essentially saying that student voice should be involved in dress code decisions.
Absolutely.
All right, our next question is that students have been repeatedly left out of decision-making processes and spaces, even though the decisions have a direct impact on them and their education. When student voice is included, it is performative, and though the students' voices may be heard, they are not listened to. How would you collaborate, listen to, and work with the students to implement the visions of the Student Bill of Rights? The main categories of the Student Bill of Rights being school culture, cultural acceptance, equity for all students, accountability of teachers and staff, centering student voice, due process, replacing the Eurocentric curriculum, and implementing a K-12 comprehensive health curriculum.
And that's loaded. Lots of layers to that particular question, right? Let me back up a little bit. I've had some questions about the Student Bill of Rights, and my main question was, why is this not an assurance that's happening at the building level? I mean, that's just a question that I fundamentally have to say, why should students have to actually go out, create a document, create an initiative, because it's not happening in their building? You mean to tell me that our students don't have due process in their own building? That's a question that I would have. You mean to tell me that they can't have access to curriculum that they can actually connect to that's in their own building? And so those were the first questions I had when I started to read the Students' Bill of Rights. I just wanted to know, how did this miss that inner culture within that school that you are in every single day? And why are those assurances not being provided? Those are just questions that I have. But as it specifically relates to your involvement, right? For me, it is, I communicate and I connect formally and informally, okay? So you'll see me at plays, you'll see me at performances, you'll see me at activities and sporting events. That's an informal way to ask questions and hear what's actually taking place, what's going on and why, and communicate. But I also believe in formal communication, which means you have a very large district, okay? And so it's very difficult for one person to be able to be in all places at the same time. It won't happen. However, for me, one of the first things that I would want to have would be an advisory council that's made up of students and from all of those particular regions, right? Because your issues, your wants, your needs are uniquely different. They're not always going to be the same, right? So I need to be able to have those conversations with student representatives that are part of my advisory committee in order to talk to me about what's happening there. Now that's the part, okay? But also from all six, we have to bring the whole together to say universally, here's what we're seeing, okay? And now that doesn't mean that we'll always be face-to-face. I mean, you've learned through this disruption that we can use technology in ways like we're doing now to have conversations, right? To struggle through problems and then come up with solutions. And so you're gonna hear me say, right, don't just bring the problem, don't just bring me the problem, because I kind of know what that is. Bring me some solutions so that we can make this a productive conversation. So you'll hear me talk about solution-based, formal, informal communications and me being present, as well as members of my team when I can't be there or they're coming behind me to follow up on the last conversation that we had. We will be active, we will be involved, and we will be engaged. Other than that, they can't work for me because we need to move Denver Public Schools to another level, and we don't have a whole lot of time to waste.
Can I ask, you talked about, so this bill was developed as an accountability measure. It's a way of putting student priorities into policy at the district and at the building levels. And you talked about prioritizing these issues more so at the building level. What accountability measures do you think could be instilled at that level to ensure that we are giving students that space and that prioritization in buildings and in classrooms, as well as at the district level?
Yeah, so one of the things that I just talked to you about, I don't know if you have an advisory council for your building leaders. I don't know if your principals have a student advisory council. Not sure, I haven't been involved in your district before. And I don't know if your buildings have provided a set of assurances that they can provide to you and your families that guarantee a specific set of outcomes and behaviors. Don't know that. Haven't been there long. I haven't been there to see it. If those are missing, that's where you start, right? If it's not there, that's where you begin. I can't hold you accountable if you don't have things in place. So what communications have students and parents and buildings had together in order to set what those assurances would be? What are the guarantees that a school is stating to you and your family that without a doubt, these are the things that you will receive or have benefit of as a student in this building? I haven't seen those. I'm going to ask for them. I just haven't seen them at this point. That would be something that if you don't have those, that's a great place to start. But also for us to be thinking about how do we support that from the district level to ensure that schools have the things that they need to make that work and make that happen. So those are my wonderings and questions that I have. And it was all based upon just the specifics that were in the document. I mean, I went right back to, I understand the need to press down and make sure that we have this universally, but how did it get to this point when their experience every day is not with the board, is not with me, it's not with my central office team, it's with folks in that school. And so where is that disconnect was a question I had. And so it'll give me more opportunities.
Thanks for that. I'm glad that you'd prioritize that level of really community interconnectedness. I do want to move on to our student source question, which comes from Ava, a DPS senior, and Evan, a junior at South. A lot of students struggle with their mental health, in part due to heavy workloads and lack of resources in schools. Many students feel that existing supports fall short. What new ways would you pursue to ensure we actually support and accommodate student mental health concerns in DPS?
Danny, that's a great question. You know, one of the things I looked at in part of my interview process was to examine the student survey, right? And in the survey, one of the things that jumped out to me was that students identified that they were able to know where to go, know who to go to. They understood where the resources were. But the one area that was, in my mind, below my expectation was in being able to make decisions alongside the school. So when I remember reading this document and reviewing it and then hearing this particular question, then I've got to go back and match that up to say, okay, where are we falling short as it relates specifically to our mental health supports for students? Because listen, there's a lot of pressure. You're trying to get through school, you're trying to get ready for the next level. And so my job is to look at all the supports that we provide to schools and see, are we equipped to support students in multiple tiers, right? Those that may need mentors, those that may need nurses, those that may need counselors and social workers and the like. Those aren't what I would consider to be delightful resources. Those are essential. And so you don't get to say, well, I don't think that they're necessary here, when in fact, you may not even know that, because sometimes people don't share with you the struggles that they're going through. So you have to have those resources available, and we will do an organizational scan to see where do we have those gaps and where are those resources not available to address it immediately.
So because we have more time, like last time, we actually have time for another question. So Talia, if you want to take this last one up.
Sorry, can you send me the question, Neil?
Yeah, actually, are you cool if I just ask it?
That's good.
This question comes from Emily, an 11th grader from South, Quentin, a 12th grader from South, and a 10th grader from DMLK. In a school district that has largely resisted change in favor of traditional school formats and comfort, how do you plan to deconstruct systems and expectations in DPS that may harm students, like dress code and school start times, and open the district to change, especially after COVID-19 radically impacted, damaged, and altered our district, revealing weaknesses within DPS?
That's a good question. You know, Neil, we've learned that traditional walking inside of a building, having a seat and a set of chairs, and being isolated in that room for hours at a time kind of went by the wayside once we went through this disruption, right? So there are multiple ways that students should be able to access education, access instruction, access opportunities. If we haven't learned anything else, that's a true statement. And so we have to be willing to take on the new opportunities that we have and not try to force everything back to the way it was, right? There's new opportunities, new access points that we traditionally may not have had because you got to get on a bus and travel for 45 minutes to get there. Well, this mechanism that we're using right now allows me to talk with you, and I have no idea where you are, but it allows me to communicate, right? And so why should that not be the case for all of our children, right? In our structures and systems. We have a lot of students who, because of this disruption, had to work, right? Spend a lot of time working and helping to support families. And so maybe now we need to be a little more unconventional about when actually schools start for that segment of our student population. Why does it always have to be 7:30? It's a question that I have, right? You want to get your minutes, you want to make sure that you meet those regulations, but also maybe that means you carry that time a little bit further into the evening if you start a little bit later, right? Because you have to meet the needs of our students. We only grow if our students are growing, right? If we're not given opportunities and avenues for students to be successful in the situations and circumstances that they're facing, we won't be successful as a district. So that's the flexibility, that's the change in our approach. And I think that we have to now start saying, we have opportunities to do things differently because of this disruption that we've had. And it shouldn't be such a big rush to go back to, even though there's a part of that, yes, but that shouldn't be primary. We've opened the gate for other opportunities, and now's the time to explore it. And let's push it forward.
Right, we have time for another question as well. So this one comes from Finley, a 6th grader at DSA, and an anonymous 11th grader at CEC. So keeping in mind that social inequity and white supremacy that we see in our society and how important intentional support can be in repairing these harms in our schools and communities, how do we hold teachers and admins accountable for actions and attitudes that uphold these harmful ideas?
Yeah. If I don't know, or if my team doesn't know, and we don't have a mechanism in order for you to be able to share those concerns, then we perpetuate what's happening. And that's because we're not available and not in a place to respond appropriately. I think part of my informal and formal communication strategy allows me to do the very thing that you're talking about, ask those tough questions and give voice to you to tell me what's actually taking place. You should have access, and you will have access to us, right? Central office, as well as senior leaders, we're not off limits, and by no means can we operate that way. But also, not that you have to come to us, but we'll be coming to you. I'm not sure if that's what you're used to, not sure if that's what they did in the past, but you'll see us. You will see us. We'll be visible and engaged in partnerships with you in order to make sure that you're successful. And I appreciate that question, in all honesty, because that's what we have to do. That's what we're required to do, and to be partners with our students. Can I ask you guys a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So I want to know, what is it that you're looking for in your next superintendent? I mean, you asked a lot of questions, and I get that. I responded to those. But the heart of the matter is that you're looking for something, right? Or you're looking for someone that has something. And so I'm interested in hearing from you, what are those things that you're looking for in your next superintendent?
I mean, when I think of what I would want in a superintendent, first, my initial thought is definitely student voice. I think that a lot of times students feel like they're underrepresented and can be treated like they aren't smart enough to have any kind of opinion on how to handle things, even though students have a really unique view on things. We're in a position where our opinions and our experiences are entirely unlike anything that teachers, parents, or people in the district experience. And so because we have that unique opinion and that unique experience, our voice needs to be heard. And right now it's just not happening. So I would want somebody who empowers student voice. I'd also want somebody who focuses on equity. I'd want somebody who brings student voice directly into the curriculum to make sure that our students aren't learning things that they're disengaged with. This is more of a specific and personal want, but I know that I've benefited a lot from an arts education, being from Denver School of the Arts, but I'm very privileged to have that. A lot of other students in DPS don't have any kind of arts education at all and don't have the kind of wealth to be able to pursue an arts education on their own. It's a major equity issue, and arts education is something that I would want to see prioritized in my next superintendent.
Anyone else?
Yeah, for me. Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, for me, something that comes to mind is like a visionary, like someone who is able to like look back on past experiences and able to like, decide, like make their decisions based on past experiences, but doesn't rely on them and doesn't like just completely rely on past systems and experiences to make their next decisions, and is able to like come up with new ideas and isn't afraid to like think outside the box. Somebody who's like open-minded and is able to like, I guess that goes along with being a visionary, just being able to like think about some new things that we could use as solutions, and also somebody who's community driven and is willing to like listen to community and prioritize the community's wants and needs.
Yeah, I'm totally agree with what you just said, Kaylin. I'll piggyback off of that. I want someone who's not afraid to dream big and isn't scared of making our district the best it could possibly be, because in my personal vision, I think our district could be the school district that revolutionizes what education is in America. So I want a superintendent that will share in that dream and that view with me and work with me and all the other students in the district to make sure that's realized.
I think the biggest thing that I want to see is someone who understands student voice not just as something to pay lip service to, but as essential to how a school runs. Students are the biggest stakeholders in education. We're the consumers of education. And I think we really, as we look towards making changes, we look towards coming back from the mess that has been COVID school, I think it's really important that our leaders understand the importance of having students in the room at all times and understand that student focused also needs to mean student led.
I just want to re-emphasize the point about somebody who's a visionary and somebody who is open to change. I think a lot of the issues that we're facing right now are issues that are fundamental within the traditional school system. And I think that if we're going to see changes to these things, like, for example, changes to curriculum, we need somebody who is going to not be afraid to gear themselves away from how schools have been run traditionally. I think that a lot of evidence has shown that schools are largely run the same way that they were run since the Industrial Revolution. And I think just like the rest of society has changed since then, the education system can too. And so we need somebody who is completely open to change.
Do I have time for another question?
I know we're coming up.
We might actually be coming up, so I think Tandi's right.
I know we're coming up on the end, so I do want to make sure. I think I have one last follow-up question, and I want to make sure if anyone else does, that gets heard. So I did want to ask, you talked a lot about communication, and I want to ask how you think communication can happen, can be strengthened between students and not just their own administration and their school classroom teachers, but district officials beyond just yourself. How do we improve students' access to officials dealing with things like gifted and talented programs or managing certain equity features? How does that happen?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there are multiple mechanisms that are available, and I'm not sure if you all are using any of those, and that would be an organizational scan that I'd have to participate in to see what mechanisms are out there that you're using. But there are multiple out there, Danny, that you can use in order to communicate directly with individuals within the division itself. And then let me tell you the caveat in that, right? From my level, I need to know how long it took us to respond to you. I need to find out, did you get your question answered, right? How long did it take, right? Who did you have to talk to? Was it rerouted or whatever? Those are the things that I pay close attention to as well, to look at how efficient we are in responding to the things that are coming out of our system, especially when students are connecting with us to ask questions. And so that you don't just have to leave a voicemail and wait until whenever somebody decides to email you back. There are systems that timestamp the minute you press send to any individual within my system. And then we track those, right? And then I want to find out from that, is it taking us longer to respond to students who are in this part of the county or part of the district versus this part of the district, right? Are we taking longer to respond to these types of questions versus these types of questions? That's the due diligence that I use in order to determine, are we really being impactful in responding to our students the way that we should? So that's one of the things that I will be paying close attention to, the different methodologies that are being used within Denver Public Schools to do just that, if they're there. If not, then we need to make a different decision.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think that ends our time with our interview with Mr. Wright. Thank you so much for all the questions that you have responded to. And so now we'll be moving, just to give a quick overview for the rest of our event. We'll be moving to a quick reflection on everything that we've heard tonight, and then a few sources of information of how you can get involved with both putting your voice into this process and showing us how you feel after hearing all these interviews, and showing us ways that you might be able to get involved with organizations working for change in student voice in the future. So I don't know about anyone else, but I think we've gotten a much better view of who all these candidates are than we had before. Students can really feel left out of processes like this. So getting actual input from our, actually, I do have a lot that I want to say here, but I think we're bringing back Dr. Sullivan for one more question. So we will save all of the ending stuff for that.
Dr. Sullivan is not able to join. She's in a different meeting.
Oh, okay, no worries. Well, then we will just keep on going with some of the ending stuff. So I think that we got a really good view of a lot of who these finalists actually are. I think that a lot of students can feel left out of these processes, and this has kind of shown that moving forward, we will be able to get more of an input into these decisions, and student voice can actually be respected more. The more students involved with DPS processes like the superintendent search, the better. I know that I was personally super interested in a lot of the emphasis on the Student Bill of Rights. For those who might not know, a group of students have worked to make a Bill of Rights that reflected what they see as the wants of the student body. And while it's not been passed yet, the opinion of the next superintendent is crucial in whether that bill is passed or not. And so hearing a lot of superintendent finalists saying that they were open to working with that Bill of Rights group and making sure that that was passed was really interesting, because I personally think that that shows a lot about how student voice might be incorporated in the future. I mean, a Bill of Rights for students could be really, really crucial to changes in the district, because that would mean inalienable rights given to students that right now we don't have. Do any of the moderators have any other opinions on that?
Yeah, it was really great to hear how much interest these candidates seem to have in being held accountable to the students and ensuring that they're holding other leaders in this district accountable. I think we have a selection of candidates that all seem to really prioritize student voice and student-led decision-making. It was interesting to see the different ways in which this can be expressed. I think particularly Mr. Wright talked a lot about communication and developing access, the access that students have to decision makers, which is definitely an issue I've heard a lot of students bring up in listening sessions. The fact that as soon as you start trying to communicate with the higher echelons of district administration, all of any impact you have starts to peter out. I'm really excited about each of these candidates, and I think being able to see how they interact with students is going to really help in my own perspective on who would be the best fit for this district.
I thought it was really cool how Dr. Marrero and Mr. Wright both talked about having a student advisory board that will work closely with them. I think that would really improve our district.
Well, oh, sorry, my bad.
Oh, I was just gonna add, yeah, like I'm really excited to kind of just dig deeper. I'm definitely going to rewatch and continue rewatching this video, and I'm excited to see what other students have to say as well.
And I think that even like really specific things that have had student voice brought up really make me excited for where we can see student voice in the future. Like, for example, bringing student voice into things like dress code. It's a very specific part of the district, but it's something that students have a really big opinion on and need to have impact on. So hearing support for student opinions in something like that really, really makes me excited for the future of DPS and student voice. I also think that a lot of what was talked about is stuff with curriculum. I think that a lot of people, especially students, have seen a lot of issues with a Eurocentric curriculum that can a lot of times completely disengage students who just aren't interested in what they're learning. And so especially hearing that we might be able to get student voice into curriculum decisions, and that curriculum is going to be questioned and changed if it's not working for what the students need, is really, really exciting. Just as a quick question for all of our moderators, what was the highlight of the town hall for you guys? For me, I definitely think that Marrero starting out and asking us like, hey, can I ask you guys a question, really threw me off guard in a like amazing way. I was totally not expecting it, but I love to see him and also Wright both trying to engage students directly and showing that they actually do care about what students have to say. What do you guys?
Yeah, I also really enjoyed the kind of conversations we got to have with Dr. Marrero and Mr. Wright. I like that they were really interested in what our vision was and what we wanted to see in the district.
Yeah, like you all said, I definitely love the conversations where we got to speak about, kind of like where they ask questions as well. I also just liked that we had to have these like conversations in general. I know like it's definitely different than just reading a bio or just watching a video, actually having conversations as in person as we can over Zoom, like it definitely was different. And I'm glad that we got this experience.
I think one of my highlights was hearing from Dr. Sullivan and also later from Mr. Wright about community building as a real priority. I think Dr. Sullivan talked a bit about ensuring that the connections students have with their teachers and with administration lend themselves to accountability in respecting student voice. And I think that recognition that communication and community building are a really important first step in allowing for actual change making, that was really good to hear.
And so I think that when trying to take away things from this interview process, the initial question that was first asked shows a lot about where these superintendents lie. Just asking what are 3 goals that you have for a superintendent position can really show a lot of where you fall. Just to give a quick recap, Marrero spoke a lot about equity in his intro. Sullivan talked a lot about student issues and unity, addressing direct problems, and brought up academic outcomes, such as trying to focus on increasing our graduation rates. While Wright focused on how close he is to DPS in the intro, which seems to be a major point for him, and talks about competition in each scale of our country in his intro, which means a lot of preparation for students after high school. From those 3 initial points, I got a lot of feedback on student success and how DPS seem to have some issues with student success and student graduation. And a lot of these superintendents are now trying to focus on how we can make sure that students are not only graduating, but also trying to actually build a future for students after high school, which for me was really empowering to hear. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think we consider ourselves a data-driven district, and that was something that all the candidates really touched on as they talked about how important those competencies are and just how important the futures of our students are. I really was glad to hear from all of them that they seem to include student needs and student perspective in that data. We need to be drawing conclusions not just from what's happening, but from what students are saying about their own experiences. And that seemed to be something that all of our candidates prioritized and acknowledged.
Yeah, agreed for sure. It's definitely something that I've heard a lot about too, with the data and stuff. So I'm definitely excited to see more about this. And I liked their anecdotes that went along with that as well. I think that was really awesome to hear.
Yeah, something else I thought was really interesting and I was really glad to hear was, I believe Dr. Marrero said how we need to adjust. I think Dr. Marrero and Mr. Wright both said how we need to adjust our schedule to accommodate for students who are working and supporting their families and who this early start time isn't working for anymore. And maybe a conventional school day isn't meeting their needs and isn't setting them up for success in either school or their work.
So I also think that something that's really important to point out is just that all of these finalists are people of color, which in a district that is majority minority, it is really, really good to see people of color in these positions actually representing the people who the district is made up of. So for all of our students listening, our moderators have some great opportunities and ways to get involved with the organizations that brought you to this town hall. Kayla, get us started with the student survey.
Yeah, for sure. So we kind of talked about this earlier on, but we do have a student survey for you to reflect on the candidates' individual responses against the expectations and qualities of the ideal superintendent. And although students can't choose the next superintendent, student voice does matter in this process. And now that you've heard everyone's answers, you get to grade our finalists. And the link is at bit.ly/super search survey, and that's all lowercase. And again, that's bit.ly/super search survey.
We also have a student choice poll. So I hope that after tonight, all the students here have gotten a pretty good feel about who the finalists are. And so This link is to an SV2 student preference poll. So go to the link and let us know if you could pick one finalist to be the new superintendent. Who would you choose? So let us know at bit.ly/super search poll. That's all lowercase again. So type that in your phone right now and fill it out and let us know.
So we've also got some ways to get involved with some organizations beyond just sharing your opinion on this specific superintendent search. What do you got for us on?
Yeah, so our first opportunity to get involved is wrapping up in just a few weeks, so hop on this fast. Student Voice, Student Vote is currently hosting a listening campaign, talking to hundreds of DPS students about what you want to see in your education. These 45-minute one-to-one conversations create space for students to talk about their experiences in DPS and to brainstorm ways to improve our learning community. A lot of the conversations we've had have helped to inform some of tonight's questions, and we're still looking for students to speak up and help make meaningful change in DPS. Schedule your listening session before the end of the month at bit.ly/SV2listens, all lowercase, to ensure that your voice is heard.
All right, we also have, oh, sorry, Kayla, over to you.
Yeah, so the last thing is Project Voice, which is a parent organization of Student Voice, Student Vote, is hosting our annual Summer Academy for youth to develop their leadership and learn the skills needed to make change in our communities. So there's 3 separate programs in our Summer Academy. The first one is My Voice, which focuses on exploring your identity and values, creating change with your lived experiences. The second is Your Voice, where you learn what to say and how to say it. This is public speaking and leadership 101. And the last one is Our Voice, which is an institute providing training on how to strategize and organize campaigns and make a difference in your community. And there's a stipend available for learning with us. Plus, we'll handle your transportation and food. The deadline to sign up is in 2 days, so make sure to really hurry to apply before this Saturday, May 15th. And you can find the application at https bit.ly/2021 Project Voice. And voice is spelled VOYCE in all lowercase.
All right, we also wanted to tell you guys a little bit about the Student Bill of Rights group. So it's a group of students from schools all across DPS who've come together and been developing a Bill of Rights and visions for our school district. So we're planning a student testimony takeover at the next board meeting on May 20th. And to see the bill and give feedback or coordinate to be part of that testimony, you can email voiceofstudentsdps@gmail.com. That's voiceofstudentsdps@gmail.com. And if you want to join the Student Bill of Rights groups, our meetings are open to anybody, and they're on Monday at 3:30 using the Google Meets code SBOR. And another opportunity we have is the Student Board of Education, or ESPO, is a civic engagement youth leadership program that creates policy and solutions and fights social justice issues impacting school communities. To get more info about this, you can email Angel_McKinley page, and I believe the email is on that flyer right there. Or if you want to bring SBOE to your school and start a class at your school, you can email studentvoice@dpsk.org. And also one more opportunity is YALL, so the Young African American and Latinx Leaders program is a student-led organization that addresses systematic inequalities in DPS and that perpetuate the school to prison pipeline through policy reform and education. To access the application for YALL, you can go to bit.ly/YALL, YAALL 2021, all uppercase. To get more info on how to get involved with YALL, you can email that same email that's displayed on the flyer, Angel_McKinley page at dpsk12.org.
So to every student who's tuned in tonight, thank you so much for watching. If you didn't catch it before, for all of our students, your survey link is bit.ly/supersearchsurvey. Make sure to fill that out if possible. It's super helpful for us to include student voice in this process. The Vimeo link for this interview will stay up for people who want to watch it later, so be sure to share it. Thanks so much, everyone. I know I have math, physics, and world history finals to go study for, so I think instead of saying have a good night, it might be more appropriate to say good luck or don't study too hard. Either way, please feel free to reach out to us at info@studentvoicestudentvote.org if you have any questions about all the ways you can get involved with SV2 and SVL, or for any help you might need on our student opinion surveys. Night, everyone.